Every war carves out its own legends, tales of courage so immense they defy belief. But few stories equal the sheer, uncompromising will of Roy Benavidez, the Green Beret, whose 6 hours of hell earned him a permanent place in the annals of American military history. Yet, to truly understand this man, we must look far beyond the battlefield, back to a difficult childhood where the fires of resilience were first stoked. Benavidez's earliest years were marked by relentless adversity, defined by the twin tragedies of losing both his parents. The young boy was left to navigate a harsh world largely alone, a world made harder by constant bullying he faced because of his mixed Yaqui Indian and Mexican heritage. His need to help support his family forced him to abandon his schooling by the 8th grade, but this very struggle, this early immersion in sacrifice and hard work, molded a spirit that refused to break a spirit that would eventually save the lives of his comrades. At the age of 19, seeking purpose and stability, his destiny found its calling as he enlisted, joining the Texas Army National Guard and serving during the tumultuous years of the Korean War. This period of service provided the foundation for a life of discipline and commitment, a commitment he soon shared with his future wife, the steadfast Hilaria Coy Benavidez, whom he married in 1959. Driven to excel, Benavidez completed airborne training, becoming proficient in jumping from planes, and was quickly assigned to the famed 82nd Airborne Division, constantly pushing himself toward the military's elite ranks. His journey took a devastating turn in 1965. As a seasoned advisor to ARVN troops in the escalating conflict in Vietnam, Benavidez undertook a solitary, highly sensitive, and classified operation to gather critical evidence. Proof that North Vietnamese regulars were disguising themselves as Viet Cong guerrillas. Disguised himself, he was on patrol along a narrow jungle trail when the earth violently erupted beneath him. He had stepped directly onto a landmine. The immediate aftermath was confusion and shock, a lonely, classified explosion deep in enemy territory, until a squad of Marines eventually found the seemingly lifeless figure. They initially treated the body with extreme caution, suspecting a booby trap, only to be astonished when they turned him over to find a Hispanic man wearing U.S. Army dog tags beneath the Viet Cong pajamas. He was quickly airlifted and evacuated. The shockwaves of that blast followed him all the way back to a hospital in the United States, where, 2 months later, his memory returned. The news he received from the doctors was crushing. The explosion had severely damaged his spine and rattled his brain within his skull, rendering a dire prognosis that he would never walk again. They spoke of a medical discharge, but to Benavidez, the Army was not a job. It was his life, and he desperately begged them not to take it away. Lying in that hospital bed, paralyzed but not broken, Roy Benavidez made a silent, unbending vow to himself. What happened next would baffle military doctors and medical science alike. A true testament to the power of human will over flesh. Night after solitary night, he would drag his paralyzed body from his wheelchair, ignoring the searing pain, beginning the agonizing process of rehabilitation by placing the weight of his torso onto his shattered legs as he inched along the wall. Weeks bled into months, each day a new measure of pushing his limit, his progress astonishing the medical staff. With the quiet, constant support of Hilaria, his rock, Roy Benavidez defied every prediction. And, 6 months after being told his walking days were over, he walked out of that hospital on his own 2 feet. His reward for this incredible feat was a promised desk job at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, a safe, administrative role far from the front lines. But the warrior spirit in Roy Benavidez could not be contained by an office. He trained with ferocity and dedication every single day, pushing his miraculously healed body back into combat-ready condition. He successfully qualified for the military's most elite fighting force, the Special Forces, earning the coveted Green Beret and a return assignment to Detachment B-56 of the 5th Special Forces Group Airborne, 1st Special Forces. The year was now 1968, and the war was raging. Staff Sergeant Raul Benavidez, now assigned the codename Tango Mike Mike, was back in Vietnam, and though he was off duty, attending church on that fateful day, his peace was instantly shattered by the frantic chatter pouring through the radio. What he heard was a cry for help that pierced him to his core. A dozen men, a Special Forces reconnaissance team, were trapped. Among them were his closest friends, including SFC, Leroy Wright, Sergeant Lloyd Frenchie Musso, and Specialist 4 Brian O'Connor. The team, which also included 9 brave Montagnard tribesmen serving in the Civilian Irregular Defense Group, CIDG, program, had been overwhelmed and surrounded by a heavily armed full-scale battalion of an estimated 1,000 battle-hardened North Vietnamese soldiers near the Cambodian border in Nha Binh. Every single man on the recon team had been wounded or killed in the initial fighting, and the situation was so desperate that 3 attempted helicopter rescues had been repulsed by the unrelenting enemy fire, leaving the aircraft riddled with bullet holes. It was on the 3rd, failed attempt that 19-year-old door gunner Michael Craig was killed, dying in Benavidez's arms upon the chopper's return. The sight of his friend's death, coupled with the knowledge that his comrades were still out there, bleeding and fighting for their lives, made Benavidez's decision instantaneous and absolute. There was no way he was going to let them die alone. Acting purely on instinct and loyalty, Benavidez leapt aboard the next returning helicopter. His departure was so sudden that he was unable to grab his M16 rifle. He was armed only with the large Bowie knife strapped to his side and the vital medical supplies in his bag. As he later recounted, his mind entered a state of autopilot. The journey to the extraction zone was a nightmare of evasion. The pilot, Larry McKibben, was forced to fly in an erratic zigzag pattern, attempting to cheat death by dodging the constant heavy gunfire, all while trying to provide minimal cover fire for the landing. As they neared the designated point, Benavidez realized the situation was worse than he imagined. His comrades were too severely wounded to run. He had to go to them. Slamming onto the ground, Benavidez exploded from the helicopter, sprinting across the bullet-swept landscape. He was immediately hit, taking a shot to the leg which, in the blinding rush of adrenaline, he initially dismissed as a thorn bush. His eyes were met with a scene of absolute carnage, a vision of hell. Men were sprawled in pools of blood, the CIDG fighters barely clinging to life, and one brave soldier was still firing back despite having his eyeball shot out and hanging down his cheek. Ignoring his own pain, Benavidez began the grueling process of dragging the wounded men into a small defensible perimeter, directing what fire they could muster against the unseen enemy, and administering life-saving morphine. He spotted O'Connor and an interpreter and frantically motioned them forward, but a renewed torrent of enemy fire forced them to take cover. Another round then struck Benavidez, hitting his thigh, a wound that dropped him to his knees but could not stop him. Popping a green smoke grenade, he signaled McKibben for the rescue extraction. As the surviving ambulatory men climbed aboard the chopper, Benavidez took an enemy AK-47 he found and suppressed the tree line, pouring fire into the enemy positions to cover O'Connor and the interpreter as they crawled toward the safety of the aircraft. But Benavidez could not leave. His focus shifted to the team leader, SFC, Leroy Wright. Wright had been killed, and crucial, classified intelligence he carried could not fall into enemy hands. Benavidez found his dead friend and began the desperate task of dragging the body toward the helicopter, a task that drew even more intense enemy fire. He was immediately shot again, this time in the stomach, and a blast of shrapnel from a nearby grenade struck his back, knocking him unconscious. When he finally awoke, the disaster was compounded. The helicopter, fatally hit by enemy fire, had crashed to the ground. The pilot, McKibben, was dead. 5 men, including Musso, miraculously survived the crash, as did O'Connor and the interpreter, who had not yet made it inside the cockpit. Driven by an incomprehensible reserve of energy, Benavidez pulled the survivors from the wreckage, distributed more morphine, and established a defensive perimeter around the crash site. Recognizing the dire need for immediate relief, he called in a terrifyingly close air support mission from the F-100 jets overhead, directing them to truck napalm onto the surrounding enemy positions. The napalm provided a brief, fiery respite, but the moment the jets ran out of fuel and departed, the relentless machine gun fire erupted once more. Benavidez, knowing their time was short, gave O'Connor a 3rd dose of morphine and took another bullet to his already wounded leg. Their position looked utterly hopeless, completely surrounded by NVA soldiers, but just as all seemed lost, the sound of an approaching rescue helicopter cut through the gunfire. Benavidez and the rescue crew worked in a frantic haze, carrying and dragging the wounded men aboard the chopper. The landing zone remained a death trap, with NVA troops firing until the last possible second, shooting 2 men in the back as they crawled toward the aircraft. Earlier, shrapnel wounds had blurred Benavidez's vision, his eyes caked shut with drying blood. But he pressed on, determined to get Musso. It was at this moment, blind and exhausted, that an NVA soldier closed on him, bunting his rifle into Benavidez's head and jaw, cracking bone, and slashing his arm with a bayonet. Benavidez desperately screamed for O'Connor to shoot, but the man was too heavily drugged with morphine to react. Facing the enemy alone, Benavidez pulled his Bowie knife and fought the soldier to the death. He then managed to drag Musso to safety before grabbing an AK-47 and killing 2 more NVA soldiers who were positioned outside the helicopter's side gunner's arc of fire. He made one final trip, ensuring the interpreter was aboard and destroying any last pieces of classified material. Only then, with the aircraft preparing for immediate takeoff, did Benavidez, the last man to leave the battlefield, allow himself to be pulled in. The bullet wound in his stomach had torn through his abdomen, leaving his intestines exposed, which he was desperately trying to hold in with his hands. The helicopter, its fuselage severely damaged and its instruments destroyed, miraculously lifted off and escaped. Upon landing, the wounded were unloaded and examined one by one. In a bizarre twist, it was discovered that Benavidez had even loaded 3 dead enemy soldiers onto the helicopter, demonstrating his absolute commitment to securing all potential intelligence. He himself was then carried off and placed on the side. He could not move or speak, his jaw broken from the rifle butt. The blood had completely glued his eyes shut, and with a shocking 37 bayonet, bullet, and shrapnel wounds covering his body, he was placed in a body bag. The medics began zipping it up, concluding he was dead, when a friend rushed forward, recognizing him and screaming, "That's Roy! That's Roy Benavidez!" The doctor, resigned, said there was nothing they could do. In one final, magnificent act of defiance, Benavidez mustered every last bit of energy and spat his bloody saliva directly into the doctor's face, causing the shocked medical officer to exclaim, "I think he'll make it." He was immediately rushed to intensive surgery in Japan, beginning a long, agonizing recovery that continued at Brooke Army Medical Center in Fort Sam Houston for nearly a year. Roy Benavidez had survived 6 hours in hell and saved at least 8 lives. Though his commander had initially put him in for the Distinguished Service Cross, fearing he might not survive the lengthier process for the nation's highest honor, the full extent of his impossible heroism eventually prevailed, Finally, on February 24, 1981, a day forever enshrined in military history, President Ronald Reagan presented Master Sergeant Raul Benavidez with the Medal of Honor. Reagan, deeply moved, stated that if the story of his heroism were a movie script, no one would believe it. Benavidez, ever the humble hero, acknowledged the honor but maintained his unwavering focus. The real heroes are the ones who gave their lives for their country. I don't like to be called a hero. I just did what I was trained to do. Master Sergeant Raul Benavidez, a soldier who stared down. Death survived the impossible and saved his brothers in arms. Passed away on November 29, 1998, at the age of 63, leaving behind a legacy of courage that will inspire generations. This animated retelling brings the past to vivid life, meticulously drawn from the accounts of respected historians with references displayed on your screen. If you were spellbound by this incredible true story of loyalty and sheer fortitude, we urge you to like this video, share it with fellow history buffs, and leave a comment below to tell us what part of Benavidez's journey resonated most deeply with you. Your support is crucial for us to keep creating engaging, immersive content like this. So please subscribe and activate the notification bell to stay tuned for our next captivating historical documentary.